So hi everybody. Again, just one more time, my name is Sam. I am the president of the Philadelphia Mycology Club. I have really always been interested in nature, but when I moved out of the Pinelands of New Jersey, I moved into the city of Philadelphia. I really missed having so much of it in my backyard, only to discover that Philadelphia is full of nature and there's still a lot of nature in my almost backyard, which is the Wissahickon and now the Schuylkill Center. So I've been at the Schuylkill Center for about 3 years. I've had many different positions there, including land stewardship coordinator, environmental educator, nature preschool teacher. I also work as a tour guide, but my primary role at this time would be that I'm the president of the Philadelphia Mycology Club. I wanted to start off this talk with the vision of the oak leaf. To me, the oak leaf really represents biodiversity because I'm sure you've all heard this quote before. Doug Tallamy says in his book, The Nature of Oaks, that a white oak tree can support over 500 species of moths and butterflies in their larval stage. But that's not the only thing that they support. In supporting those 500 species, they are, of course, also supporting many species of birds in our area, lots of small mammals, incredible amounts of mycorrhizal fungi, and decomposer fungi, but I'll try and keep the mushroom talk to a minimum tonight. Just a little bit about me, of course. Oh, it didn't. Oh, there we go. Okay. There's a photo of me with a mushroom. This is what I'm normally doing in the forest. I'm crawling around on the forest floor. I love to hear the birds around me, but I am not a birder. I promise you that every person in this room knows more about birds than I do. But I'm happy to be here with you today. I also wanted to share this photo of me on a bird walk, clearly not looking at a bird. But of course, I really do enjoy them, and I know that they are important as well. Early into learning about mushrooms, it became very clear to me that mushrooms really favored certain types of habitat. And that habitat was habitat that was not disturbed and was fairly untouched, and really like high quality native habitat. So that pushed me into my career as a land steward. I have this beautiful picture of me here. And I began working with lots of different places doing land restoration work, particularly at the Schuylkill Center, where I learned a whole lot about native plants. So what is the biggest threat to North American birds? What do you guys think? Habitat loss. Yeah? Do we know this bird? I'm sure you guys know this bird. Yeah, and when I was reading about this bird, one of the things that I read about it was that it loves to nest in lichens, which are, of course, a fungus. But lichens are incredibly susceptible to dying because of air pollution. So this is one type of habitat loss that I'm only going to touch on here. But air pollution and fighting for clean air and clean waterways is one of the ways in which we can improve our habitat quality for all of the organisms that live here, including the birds. But I also, as a naturalist, have encountered many birders who have talked to me about the birding habitat and have at times expressed that they were unhappy with the process of the restoration work that I was doing. This is a trust the process moment here, because what I'm about to show you, and I'm not saying anyone in this room thinks this or anybody on Zoom, I'm about to show you some slides that I've been told were high quality bird habitat. Do we know this plant? So this one's Japanese knotweed. We've got Japanese honeysuckle. We've got autumn olive. We've got Japanese barberry. This one is porcelain berry. Come on.
The internet's kind of slow here today.
Okay. Multiflora rose, jet bead. Oh, okay. So I understand why, if I was a bird, I would want to be here too. All of these plants are thicket forming, so they form really dense clusters. A few of them were evergreen, providing lots of shelter, especially in the winter months of the year. And many of them are berry producing. Some of them even have berries that are delicious and edible to people as well. I understand. But there is definitely a difference in what we would see in a high quality habitat. So the first slide here of birds is a collage of some of our mostly resident birds that stay here throughout the year. These are birds that will explore some of those more damaged sites and maybe are not too specific about what they like to eat and where they like to hang out. And that's really cool. I love to see these birds all year. Then we have our open woodland birds. I struggled so much with what to put on this slide because so many of our birds like open woodlands. So that is a transitional area, what you might refer to as edge habitat, your yards, cemeteries often, places where there is a lot of space in between the woody plants, but still a substantial number of woody plants like trees and shrubs nearby. Most of our birds are going to prefer this habitat. I put just a few of them here. Let's talk about what composes that habitat in a native landscape. I wanted to put this gray birch here. Some of you might know my friend Sasha. Sasha loves to tell a story about the magical birch over near the farm at the Schuylkill Center, and it's a gray birch. Throughout my time at the Schuylkill Center, I've seen so many birds and insects on this gray birch at the Schuylkill Center. The things that I chose to put on this slide do not necessarily reflect things that I saw personally, but these are things that do associate with the gray birch. So here we have the birch dagger moth caterpillar down here. That's a specialist on birch. We have the bronze birch borer. This one, boring beetles are often sort of demonized for being bad for trees, and they are bad for trees if you're thinking about just the tree. But in this context, I would like for us to open up our view of what we might be thinking about as far as who is in our landscape and whether or not we would like to see them there. So for instance, the bronze birch borer is a native insect. And although this insect will kill this tree, it is still supposed to be here. You can't hate the cat for killing the mice. You can't hate it for killing the birds, though. Please keep your cats inside. Then I brought a ruffed grouse and a black-capped chickadee, and who do we have here? Oh, at the bottom, a junco. That's what I thought. And I wanted to add that this is a good nesting site. It offers seeds to birds, and it also offers flowers. So for instance, the ruffed grouse actually eats the flowers of the birch tree after they fall off. And this tree can support up to 411 species of moths and butterflies in their larval stage. So that is also a lot going on for the birds. This is a pioneer species. This is going to move in after some sort of extinction event. So that might be a fire or a clear cutting or a landslide or anything like that. This is going to be one of the first trees that can move into an area, making it a great space if you have a lawn that you're trying to convert to habitat. This is a good choice for you. Then I have the eastern white pine. This is one of my all-time favorite trees. This is, of course, the tallest and one of the largest trees in our landscape. This tree is not for everyone, but I respect that about it. So this tree will support cottontails. They love to eat the tender shoots of a young tree. They like to break away at the bark in the winter. It also supports a specialist, the white pine weevil. So this is an insect that will lay its eggs in the terminal shoot of the white pine while it's still fairly young. And then it will cause the white pine to branch out and upwards. And that structure, the branching out and upwards, is it creates an essential type of habitat for nesting. And because of that, the white pine is also a favorite nesting spot for lots of different raptors. You guys can fact check me on this, but I've been told that the great horned owl likes to steal other birds' nests or take it over the next year. So I guess this would be a hawk nest first and then great horned owls. But every time I've seen a great horned owl, it's been in an eastern white pine. And then, of course, eastern white pines are excellent trees for mycorrhizal fungi. So I popped a painted suillus on here as well. Fungi, of course, are basically bug hotels, and we know that birds eat bugs. I also have a pine siskin here and a yellow-bellied sapsucker. Ooh, I'm getting them. Of course, then it produces seeds that are edible to lots of different wildlife, including the birds, great nesting material, and it can support up to 243 species of moths and butterflies. This tree loves to be in a sunny area, kind of at like a meadow's edge. It's a great yard tree if you've got a larger yard. And it prefers upland sites, although it does like quite a bit of moisture as well. The pussy willow, this is a great tree. This is a small tree. Maybe you would prefer to refer to this as a shrub. They're kind of the same thing in my mind. The pussy willow can support up to 455 species of moths and butterflies. So again, we've got a lot of food for our insectivorous birds. I read while I was putting this PowerPoint together that 60% of adult birds feed their babies caterpillars. So of course, we're supporting a lot of butterflies here. We have the viceroy, which loves willows, and then also a hair streak. This, can you guys see that? Yeah, okay, cool. Oh boy. This gall here is from a gall gnat that is a specialist on willow trees. So it will lay its eggs inside of the shoot, and then it will create sort of housing for the baby gnats. And then once the gnats hatch, of course, they're food for lots of different things, including hummingbirds. I put this little bush down here to indicate that this could be similar to like a thicket forming habitat. So I know that that's something that birds will prefer. And so this would be a good choice in almost any yard. This is also appropriate for a garden. And then who do we have down here? We have a harrier and a willow flycatcher and a goldfinch, all of whom prefer to nest in pussy willows. This is an elderberry bush. Elderberries, of course, produce berries, so they feed our berry-eating birds. They also produce flowers, so they have lots of pollinators that come to them. So I put here a Prometheus moth caterpillar because this is one caterpillar that will use an elderberry as its host. This is a giant caterpillar. It is like larger than my thumb. It's really big. Then we have an elderberry borer with these long antennae. It's very cute. So this will bore into the elderberry. This is, of course, again, not necessarily a good thing for the elderberry, but a good thing for ecology. So this is a specialist on elderberry, and something that I personally wouldn't mind seeing in the landscape. Then I have a white-footed mouse up here. the iNaturalist observation that went along with this photo was hilarious. I don't know what the mouse was doing in the other images, but it was very interesting. More on that later. The white-footed mice like to eat the young shoots of the elderberry over the winter. And so, of course, we're feeding the mice, we're feeding the raptors. The elderberry supports approximately 34 species of moths and butterflies. So we're not reaching the crazy numbers of the white oaks, but many of the caterpillars that do choose the elderberry as their host tree are specialists and have just a few hosts that they'll choose from. So this is still one that we would love to see. Yeah, okay. Now we have twig dogwoods. So I put Cornus species multiple because there are a few native species of twiggy dogwoods that all sort of fill the same niche in slightly different habitats. So one might be local to ponds, one might be local to streams, one maybe likes a little bit drier, but for the most part, they support the same species. So here we have the dogwood sawflies. So these sawflies actually turn into something similar to a wasp. And these are a native insect. They do cause major defoliation in some of these dogwoods, but it's pretty late in the season. And at that point, they are really good food for our birds. But if we're not planting these things for the native insects and for the birds and the other things, what are we planting them for? Then I have this thing. This moth is called a snout. I don't remember which snout. And a muskrat. Muskrats love to eat twiggy dogwoods. And then we have the willow flycatcher again, the goldfinch, and a cedar waxwing. This is good nesting, a good nesting site for a lot of birds. It also produces berries and flowers, supports 124 species of moths and butterflies, and will be thicket forming. The Carolina rose, this is one of my favorites. The Carolina rose is very similar to our non-native roses in habitat. It brambles, much as the others do, although it is less thorny than multiflora rose. And its flowers are pink, which is, to me, very delightful. So for its associates, I chose 3 specialists. We have the curled rose sawfly. That's this cute little guy over here. And the bee-like scarab. So this is a fuzzy beetle that doesn't specialize just on rose, but has very few hosts. And what else did I put here? This is a rose beetle. I didn't write down his name, but I remembered he was a specialist, and he's actually pictured here on the rose. To go with the roses for birds, I put a ruffed grouse, a brown thrasher, and a common mockingbird. Northern mockingbird. This is a good nesting site. It produces rose hips, which are sort of like a berry, and of course flowers, thicket forming, and supports 135 moths and butterflies. We're going to move on to a different habitat now. We're working with a grassland, so I chose some grassland species here. I don't know how often, I mean, of course I see red-winged blackbirds everywhere, and they make their cute little clicking sounds. I don't know how often any of you see northern bobwhite quail, but I do like them. And then we have eastern meadowlark and kestrel. Yeah, got them. So when I'm talking about a grassland, I'm going to differentiate this here from a meadow as being an area that is, I don't know if this is like a hard definition, but this is how I'm using it here for this presentation. I'm differentiating this as an area that is primarily going to be grasses and is going to be quite a bit drier than what I'm going to refer to as a meadow later. So I'm from the blueberry capital of the world. Here's a blueberry bush. There are maybe 6 species of blueberry that are considered to be native to here, all of which fill different, very specific niches. And you should plant which species works best for your space. So if you're working with a really dry space, like a grassland, you might want to choose a low bush blueberry. If you're working with a dry cliff, you might want to choose something more like a deerberry. Or if you're working with like a wetland, you might want to choose a high bush. That's totally up for you. So to go along with our blueberry, we have the snowbell clearwing, snowberry clearwing, the beggar mop, and a bumblebee, Bombus species. It was not determined on iNaturalist. Then we have the orchard oriole. Oh boy, you just told me northern mockingbird, and the scarlet tanager, who will all pick at the blueberries. Blueberries, very surprisingly, support 281 species of moths and butterflies, as well as, of course, many other insects, and many different mycorrhizal fungi associate with blueberries as well. They can be thicket forming, especially where I'm from in the New Jersey Pinelands, making them really great habitat. So this is sort of more of a collage of other species that you might see in these drier grassland areas, like in the Pinelands. So in the top left, we have shining sumac. There are lots of different types of sumac in the genus Ruse. They all produce berries that have a habit of sticking on the plant through the winter, so they're great food for overwintering birds. This specific species of sumac, shining sumac, is really good for dry areas like in the New Jersey Pinelands. We have a bracket fern here. Bracket ferns are species that will move in shortly after a burn and are among the first species to return after that, providing a lot of shelter and that sort of habitat. All the way at the top right, we have Pennsylvania sedge, Carex pennsylvanica. Unlike a lot of our grass species, sedges tend to support a lot more insect larvae than a lot of our grasses do. So this would be a good choice if you're working with some shadier areas of a grassland. Bottom left, we have partridge berry. This will have winter berries for any of our overwintering birds to pick at. This is actually fairly closely related to a blueberry, and it's a nice, cute little evergreen ground cover. Delightful. Bottom middle, we have Baptisia. This is called false indigo, I think is the common name. This is the yellow species. And this will grow at the edges of a grassland. And then finally, we have a flax-leafed aster on the bottom right. So these are here supporting some of our pollinators. Pretty commonly in New Jersey, we have these eastern fence post lizards, and that would, of course, be food for our raptors. And this insect is our native ash borer. This is it's a red ash borer.
That one's native, you said?
I am pretty sure. Yeah. So some other grassland species here, we've got fragrant goldenrod. Maybe it's called sweet goldenrod. Solidago or odora, and it smells like anise. So this is common in the grasslands. Of course, goldenrod supports a million insects. Love to see it. Then we have butterfly weed. This is a milkweed that thrives in a dry and well-drained area. We brought our blueberry back. We've got our prickly pear cactus, which is edible to people. It's a preferred food for box turtles and is a preferred nesting site for the bobwhite quail. Some other food for the bobwhite quail, we've got our partridge peas here. That is a large percentage of their diet. Apparently, they eat a lot of protein that they get from the partridge peas. And then we've got little blue stem grass in the bottom right. So the blue stem grass gets its seeds in the fall and will have the seeds persist on the plant throughout the winter. And it will sort of stand up straight throughout the winter, unlike a lot of our other grasses. So this is great food and great habitat as well. This guy is a red ant. I don't remember the name of this ant. This is an ant that we see red velvet ant that we see really commonly in the Pinelands. And then we've got our snake here. So if I was going to build a habitat for the quail, this is what I would put in it. I would choose an upland site for these plants, and I would hopefully be adjacent to a larger tract of land as well, where I would hope that they would come in from. So I mentioned these plants before, but we've got the little blue stem grass, our blueberry, we've got our prickly pear cactus, and our partridge peas. We're going to move on to the forest now, which is my favorite habitat as a mycologist. Here we have, on our left, we've got the brown creeper. I've got a northern flicker, a whippoorwill, a Kentucky warbler. These two I'm gonna mix up. You guys know. Who's this?
That's the thrush.
That's the, okay. And then over here we've got the flycatcher again, right? Yeah. My favorite tree of all time is the American basswood, Tilia americana. This tree is sort of just best all around. Oh no, it must not have saved. I did the pictures, the other pictures are left over from the birch. It must not have saved. I'll tell you a little bit about the American basswood. It does support 149 moths and butterflies in their larval stage. When you cut an American basswood, it will regrow as like a very dense bush. So it is thicket forming and a good nesting space. It does produce berries, and it also produces extremely fragrant flowers. I will say, shy of oaks, this is the species that I find with the most like insect life buzzing around it throughout the summer months of the year. And of course, that would support most of our insectivorous birds. This is commonly seen in plant communities alongside shagbark hickory, which is next. So our shagbark hickory is, again, in plant communities with the American basswood. And it produces these large edible nuts that are edible to people, but also, of course, to wildlife. So I've got our chipmunk here. We're feeding our raptors. We also have the brown creeper here. I read while I was making this presentation that the creeper likes to hide in the shagging bark of the hickories. This is also, I think, common practice for bats. They like to hide in the bark of the hickories. I've got a hickory borer up here on the top right. So this is, again, a boring beetle. In theory, this would be bad for our tree, but it is good for our ecology. It's a native insect. And we've got a hickory leaf curler here as well, this tiny little drab moth. This will support 235 species of moths and butterflies. It produces seeds and also flowers. This is good for rolling hills. It likes to be in moist to moderate conditions, and I put part shade on here because I think the plant would like to start out in part shade condition as a seed, but as it grows, it is going to reach the canopy and it's going to want full sun as it gets larger. Next, I've got buttonbush. This is one of my favorite plants for pollinators because when it is in full bloom in the summertime, I have never seen as many butterflies as I have on a buttonbush. It is just absolutely excellent for nectar seeking insects and also, of course, nectar seeking birds. So I've got our hummingbird down here. It is a really dense shrub. Ooh, it is a really dense shrub. So it's good. It's a good nesting site. It likes to grow sort of right on the edge of a body of water, whether that be a stream or a pond. It's seed producing and also flower producing. It supports only 25 species in their larval stage, but it's greatly outweighed by how many species it supports in its flowering stage. I put the tiger swallowtail here. That's definitely a species I've seen a lot in association with buttonbush. We've got our clearwing again and the rosy maple moth, which is one of my favorites. These flowers actually will glow under a UV light, which is usually indicative that they're a favorite of moths and other nighttime pollinators. I also put a strawberry bush on here. So I couldn't find a whole lot of information about the strawberry bush and any sort of insects that associate with it, although it did have 14 caterpillars listed that it would associate with the strawberry bush. The reason that it's on this list, the reason it made it to the presentation is because it will become an extremely dense brambling shrub, and it likes to grow in like wet lowland areas. So this has been part of the restoration plan for sites that are seeking to bring back a population of Kentucky warblers. So that's how it made it onto this presentation. It is also a larval host for the largest moth in North America, which is the robin moth that we see here in its brilliant red. It does also produce berries and flowers and would be good habitat also for the Carolina wren. So now we've reached the herbaceous layer of the forest. So I put some things on here that we might find in the herbaceous layer. We've got some evergreen ferns. These are Christmas ferns. These will stay green, of course, all year. This is great habitat for anybody who's overwintering, whether that be a salamander or an insect or a bird that's looking to hide. Another evergreen on the forest floor is the plantain leaf sedge down here on the bottom left. So again, that's evergreen. It's going to support a lot of overwintering animals. On the top middle, we have golden ragwort. This is an excellent pollinator plant, and it is also one of the best restoration plants because this guy will tussle with all the invasives. If there's anybody who's going to grow up through the English ivy, it is this plant, which makes it really good. Right, right. So this is a great plant to put in almost anywhere. It's a survivor for sure. At the bottom here, we have doll's eyes. These like to grow in the herbaceous layer of the forests. They are a really big herbaceous plant, and they get this incredible plume of white flowers, and then they turn into these rather creepy berries. I also wanted to include here, top right, we have Symphotrichum cordifolium, blue wood aster. This is a keystone species in Pennsylvania. This plant is semi-evergreen, so you'll see its foliage throughout the year. It's a really heavy seeder, so you will see it seeding out like crazy in the fall. Of course, great for the birds. And it also will retain its flowers really late into the season. So there were some blue wood asters that kept their blooms into like the middle of December last year, um, which is incredible and was great for any pollinators that were still out and about. In the bottom right, we've got a spring beauty with a specialist native bee on it. So that's the spring beauty minor there at the bottom. And then for our special guests, we have a chanterelle mushroom. That's somebody you might find in the forest floor associating with an oak tree. And then we've got, of course, our squirrel. We're feeding the raptors. If I was going to build a habitat for a Kentucky warbler, this is what I would choose. I would choose an oak tree up in the canopy, preferably one that's already established so the other plants can go in and grow underneath. If there was a break in the canopy layer, I would want to put in a pussy willow. They do require quite a bit of sun. But the Kentucky warbler does prefer like a moist habitat. So there's a good chance that you'll be working with a stream bed where you'll have a break in the sun. Again, we've got our strawberry bush and Carex Pennsylvania sedge in the herbaceous layer. And then I wanted to build a habitat for the whippoorwill. This bird is really like near to my heart because I used to hear them a lot when I lived in the Pinelands. I'd hear them at night all the time. And I don't think I've heard one since I was a kid, even when I was camping. So yeah, we could build a habitat here. I've chosen an eastern white pine because that's what would be appropriate in Philadelphia, but if we were in the Pinelands, we might want to choose something more like a pitch pine or a Virginia pine, depending on how close you are to the shore. We've got the leaves of a swamp white oak here. Or no, actually, this is a chestnut oak on our top right. Then I've got the mountain laurel. The mountain laurel produces flowers, which is, of course, great for our pollinators. And it's evergreen, so it's going to provide habitat throughout the winter as well. We've brought our fragrant goldenrod back, again, for the pollinators and the insects, because the whippoorwill mostly does eat insects. And then maybe if I was going to add one more thing, I would add probably one of those evergreen ferns, maybe like the marginal wood fern that stays green all year, but would be appropriate in this ecosystem. Then we've got a meadow. So I struggled again with this slide to choose some birds for the meadow because most birds like meadows. So I could have put anybody up here, but here are the friends that I've chosen. I'm sure you all know these people. We've got our bluebird down here. We've got a red-tailed hawk, a tufted titmouse, and a tree swallow. So again, I made the distinction as a grassland being a fairly dry, primarily grassy ecosystem. And then in the meadow, we're moving more towards flowering plants, although there will still be some grasses. And importantly, the grassland was also contained some things that would have been considered evergreen. The meadow would be entirely herbaceous. So in our top left, we've got bergamot. This is in the mint family. It is a favorite for pollinators. There are hardly any pollinators that won't go to a bergamot, but here we've got a bumblebee. Bottom left, we've got a black-eyed Susan. Black-eyed Susans are awesome flowers. They are one that will just thrive no matter where you put them, including in a meadow that is often overrun with invasives like bittersweet and stiltgrass. Top middle, we've got the Virginia mountain mint. So this is another one that will tussle with the invasives, great for the pollinators. On the bottom, we've got skullcap, great for the pollinators. We've got a lot of mints here, a lot of things in the mint family. Yep. And then on the top right, we have, is this big blue stem? we've got big blue stem grass, and that's grass that will compose a lot of the meadow. That's a primary plant there. And then on the bottom right, we have common milkweed, which is, of course, the host for the monarch butterfly. And then I've chosen a green sweat bee. I won't venture to tell you which of the sweat bees. The bee people have told me you need microscopy to tell them apart. I don't know which one this is. He's hanging out in an aster, though. And then we've got a monarch butterfly on a white-topped umbrella aster. More meadow plants here. We've got Culver's root. This one grows extremely tall, favorite of some of the really small sweat bees. In the bottom left, we've got Augustaceae. We call this one. It'll come to me. The Latin name is Augustaceae. Hyssop. Yeah, yeah, that one. In the top middle, we have New England asters. These bloomed really early for me last year, but they are typically fall blooming. Bottom middle, we have northern bayberry. This is the larval host for quite a few caterpillars. It's a shrubby, woody plant, and it also produces extremely hard berries that are very good for the birds, but not good for people. Technically, they're edible, but don't try. We've got another blue stem grass, and of course, we brought our milkweed back. Our special guests in this image are the ladybug here. Ladybug is growing some green beetle hanger fungus. This is a beetle STI, special guest. And then we have our white-footed mouse. If I was going to build a habitat for a woodcock, here's what I would put in it. I would put in these northern bayberries. They provide some cover, some sort of structure to the meadow. They have some berries. They support some caterpillars. This beautiful yellow flower is a woodland sunflower. We have the native hibiscus. I think this one's called swamp rosemallow. This one also has a specialist bee that associates with it, the hibiscus turret bee. I brought in the swamp milkweed, sassafras leaf, our blue-stemmed grass, and a possum haw viburnum. So all of these plants are going to support a lot of different native insects, between our specialist bees, our monarch butterflies, and then of course we have our berries supporting lots of different birds. So we're moving on now to a garden. So these are birds that we see a lot in the garden. Specifically, I see these birds a lot in the garden at the Schuylkill Center. We do, of course, have bird feeders there as well. So a combination of visiting the bird feeders and visiting our native plants. Here are some things that I would put in the garden and have put in the garden. So on the top left, we have winterberry holly. So this has berries that come in the late season and stick around through the winter. Great bird food for the winter. This is also a favorite for our native bees. I don't know if you guys know this, but hollies produce caffeine in their flowers, and the bees are actually fully addicted to it, just like I am. In the bottom left, we've got our purple coneflower. This is a favorite for the goldfinch. It produces these like beautiful seed heads, so they will perch on there and pick out all the seeds. But of course, it's beautiful and supports lots of pollinators throughout the growing season. Top middle, we have blazing star. This is a great choice for the garden because it doesn't get too crazy, but it would of course also do very well in the meadow. The foliage looks a lot like grass, but it is a great nectar plant for our pollinators. At the bottom middle, this is bignonia. Crossvine is the common name. And this is a favorite for our hummingbirds. Top right, I've got a fothergilla here. This is a shrub that produces another biofluorescent flower. And so this one is also thicket forming, likes to grow in a wet area, but is great for the garden. And bottom right, we've got some garden phlox. Our special guests are the Carolina mantis and the stinky squid stinkhorn. This is a mushroom that likes to grow out of wood chips and is very commonly seen in the garden, but it also attracts a lot of flies. And so we've got food for our birds there as well.
What is that, the plant?
This is a mushroom. Yes, special guest in the garden. So if I was going to build a little garden for a hummingbird, these are the things that I would choose to be there. Hummingbirds really love the color red. Maybe you guys know why that is. I do not know why that is. But I do know that they love the color red and they love these tube-shaped flowers. So in this image, this hummingbird is actually drinking out of a cardinal flower. Cardinal flowers grow typically in an area that's wet, but they will do well in a maintained and well-watered garden. On the bottom left, these are, I think these are called Indian pinks. I think that's the common name. Spigelia marilandica is the Latin name. And then pussy willow is another good choice for a hummingbird. A fothergilla, a bee balm. Bee balm is just one of my favorite plants. I think a bee balm is more appropriate for a garden than a meadow because it is really prone to powdery mildew, which can be sort of mitigated in the garden a little better. But again, it has those long tube flowers that are red, like the hummingbirds just love. And then we've got our bignonia crossvine in the bottom right. Where do you buy native plants? You can buy them at the Schuylkill Center. And you can also buy them at Good Host Plants. John at Good Host Plants specializes in local ecotypes, so those would be a really good choice for restoration work. But if you're interested in more of like a landscaped garden, the Schuylkill Center has a lot of really good close to ecotype nativars that are a little more spectacular in their floral designs. And you can visit the Earth Day plant sale at the John James Audubon Center, which is going to be coming up on April 21st. I will be there. I'll be tabling for the Philadelphia Mycology Club, and I'll be leading a guided walk that day. I hope to see you guys there as well. And if you don't have a yard or if you are unsure where to start, you can get involved with a group that's doing stewardship. So this photo was from a stewardship day that we did as the Mycology Club in partnership with the Discovery Center. So this was at Whippy Meadow. We planted about 300 native plants on this day, fenced them all in, made sure that they were close to the water. So the goal here is to restore some of the habitat along the creek where there had been a lot of Japanese knotweed and other invasive species sort of taking over the area. So big thanks to Robin at the Discovery Center for putting this event together. There's going to be a few more of them this year, and I would love to see some of you there. And then here are some resources that I use. I use them in my everyday work, but I also use them in the making of this presentation. So we've got The Living Landscape by Doug Tallamy. He is amazing. He's like the guy for restoration work. I'd also love to recommend his book, The Nature of Oaks. That is an awesome book that follows an oak tree throughout a year and all the things that associate with it. The middle book, Forest and Thicket, is the first in a series by John Eastman. This book series came out in the 90s, but it has just an absolute wealth of information. It breaks down a plant species and then everything that associates with it. So if it's a bird or a fungus or most often he's talking about insects. It also has some really beautiful illustrations and has been just a tremendous resource in my own learning. Then we've got Native Plants of the Northeast by John Leopold. Whether or not he knows it, Don Leopold was my first plant mentor. He has a really great series on YouTube called Dendrology, and that was how I learned all the trees. And then I picked up his book. This is more like a field guide than the others, although it is a hardcover book. And for anybody who's here in person, I brought these books with me if you wanted to take a look. And then finally, big thank you to anyone who puts their photos on iNaturalist with the Creative Commons open, because I have used your photos for every presentation I've ever given. And I love you for that. And thank you for using iNaturalist at all also, because that is where I've done so much of my learning. And this couldn't be possible without iNaturalist. If you're not on iNaturalist, please get on there before the City Nature Challenge so we can force you to observe biodiversity with all of your friends. It's a punishment. That's it, my friends. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Sam. We'll take questions from the room. Bart, can you get questions from Zoom? And but Bobby?
Yes.
So this, you mentioned only a couple slides ago, the replanting event that Robin helped organize, or that one. What's your strategy for removing the invasive plants?
That's a great question. So in the back of this image, there is like over here behind my friend Tim, there's a big piece of bamboo forest that we cut down that day. So for that, we're gonna put a tarp on it and hope to smother it. With the Japanese knotweed, we've been hacking away at it for about 5 years. That was when we started working in this area, and it is a very persistent weed. It is really terrible. But we have been doing some live staking in there, prioritizing getting the knotweed out of the areas that we've done the live staking in. And also hitting it with like a brush hog and a weed whacker as much as we can, just trying to hack away at it a little at a time. That's our best hope for some of these areas. I tend not to lean on things like herbicide, although I do think that in some cases it's necessary. I definitely don't want to be spraying it near like a body of water. That seems like a recipe for absolute disaster. So we're working with manual removal. We do have groups in there like twice a month working on this.
Does tarping work small scale for knotweed? I mean, I realize you couldn't do it in Woodland, but it's.
So I'm thinking knotweed might be what my sister and brother-in-law are doing up in Maine. They have a spread of land, and they're tarping something that might be that. That was like a relatively small patch that was isolated.
We had success with it at Connie's mother's house. There was an small area, and we carpet. We actually used, we happened to be cutting carpet out of the house anyway, so we just threw all the old carpet on it.
Whatever works. If
Yeah.
it was getting trashed
But
anyway.
But it took like almost 2 years. You know, you can't take it up because it'll. You can't remove the carpet.
I think it's the one thing, not near water. If I were managing a piece of land, not near water, I think it's the one thing I would paint herbicide on.
Yeah, and I completely understand that. If it was not next to the water.
Woods, resources to really do anything.
Mm-hmm.
If you go down Lighthouse Avenue, Cape May Point, it's along the entire stretch. And I pull it out and make a section for the birds, and then come springtime, things just fall back again. And
Yeah.
I tried herbicide like 3-4 years ago and gave up.
Yeah, a lot of herbicides are geared towards woody plants as well, and they won't work on herbaceous plants like knotweed. So yeah, you really have to know what you're doing if you're messing with herbicides for sure. And I wouldn't advocate for it near a stream.
I have one question and a comment. You mentioned Euonymus americana in low-lying areas, and that's really interesting. Have you seen it get to a dense bushy form? I mean, I'm in the Pine Barrens a lot, don't tend to see it at all, but when I'm in Pennsylvania, I see it a lot on rocky kind of dry slopes, but it's twiggy.
Yeah.
And I guess the deer, maybe it's because the deer eat it before it has a chance to grow to what you were describing, but Have you seen that actually work where it's gotten to a point where it's the dense bushy thing it's supposed to?
Yeah, I have.
Excuse me, can you repeat the question so that?
Can the
people-
question be repeated?
Yes, could you
please?
repeat the questions, please? We can't hear it on Zoom.
Yes, you got it. So the question was, have I seen a strawberry bush become a dense thicket as it's supposed to do? Because it is often seen not doing that. But the answer is yes, I have seen it become a dense thicket, and it was in a lowland, very wet site that was fenced in from the deer. So it wasn't, yeah, it wasn't being preyed upon.
Pinelands or?
No, this is at the Schuylkill Center.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There, okay.
Yeah, so like in the deer fencing, for sure.
Well, I'm going in.
Get in there.
And then my other just quick, you say you haven't heard of whippoorwill. I mean, I know you're from, you haven't heard of whippoorwill when you've gone back there as an adult?
Yeah, I mean, that's like pretty anecdotal. I mean, I definitely don't spend the amount of time. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, have I really not heard of whippoorwill? And the answer is that I haven't spent nearly the amount of time that I have when I was a kid. I was out running around until midnight every night for 18 years.
Okay, I guess I'll put it on weekends.
Okay. I know, I'm sure they're there. I also, I didn't say this, but I read while I was doing this that the population of whippoorwills has declined 60% over 44 years from 1970 to 2014. So 2014 is right around when I moved out of the New Jersey Pinelands. Population declined 60% over 44 years from 1970 to 2014. So 2014 was around when I moved out.
So I would think that the Wissahickon, or, well, the Schuylkill Nature Center could be a good place to go, maybe, in the lowlands. So,
It might be.
but probably none of us get in there at night, but so if you ever know of any reports there, let us know.
I've spent considerable time there at night and haven't heard them, but I also am not necessarily intentionally quiet. Yes, my friend.
I have a question about oaks.
Sure.
You pointed out the number of, I forget the exact, the number that you pointed out, but it's huge of butterflies and moths that oaks support. And Doug Tallamy, of course, is a real champion of oaks, and as other people are.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering why oaks are so good for butterflies and moths. And there are three things that there are three possible explanations that I can think of, and I'm wondering if any of them will hold water or, okay, one of them is that Quercus, the oak genus, of course, is an enormous genus. Okay, so there are a lot of different kinds of oaks out there. So is it possible that some insects are specialists on a few oak species and others are specialists on other oak species? And since Quercus is such a large genus, you're really grouping together lots of different plants. That's one possible thing I can think of. Another is that before the chestnut blight and humans with axes got here, the dominant forest in this area was oak chestnut. So just there was a lot of time for all of this radiation and coevolution to occur, and that might account for a large number of species. And the third thing I can think of is that there's something special about oaks. You know, do oaks as a genus, do all oaks have some magic je ne sais quoi that all these insects like? How could you explain why oaks are so good in supporting insects and everything that the insects support too, of course?
Yeah. So the question was, can I explain why oaks are so good at supporting insect life and also other life? So you mentioned that the statistic might be encompassing many things in the genus Quercus. I will say, according to Doug Tallamy, it is specifically the white oak Quercus alba that is supporting that many species of moths and
That's
butterflies.
on your first slide.
Yes, yes. So it's specifically Quercus alba. I don't know if that statistic was in the full range of Quercus alba. So for instance, Quercus alba will grow from like the end of the bottom range of Appalachia all the way into Canada. And so there are lots of different Lepidoptera that fall in just little sections of that range. So it might be encompassing those. And that might not mean 500 species could be in your yard right now. So I think that that is what the statistic meant, would be in the full range, not just here in Philly. But there is something special about oaks. So I think probably you guys know, but maybe you don't know, that oak trees produce like really heavy tannins. But those tannins are not necessarily present, or maybe aren't fully like developed when the leaves are young and tender and still green, and they take like the whole season to really develop. And that's why oak leaves preserve so well. So if you're like in the forest, and it's, I don't know, March, before all the trees have leafed out, when you look on the ground, all you see is oak leaves, as opposed to like maples and hickory and all the other stuff that is present there, but their leaves have been eaten away by the insects that once they've hit the forest floor. So I think that is maybe related to why we see so many insects using the oak as their larval host. Maybe because they have to, otherwise we would have so many oak leaves everywhere. Something has to eat them at some point. So eating them while they're young and tender, they don't get as many tannins. That might be the best time to prevent oaks from taking over the world. But I was also, while I was,
Tannin deficient beech leaves.
those are also really persistent though on the ground. I don't know. Yeah. So I will also say that there is something special about oaks, and actually the whole order Phagales. So when I was thinking about this presentation and putting together these like ecotypes, it kind of occurred to me that there were like 4 main orders of plants that I was working with here, and that would be Phagales, which would include oaks and beeches, but also the northern bayberry, other myrtles, sweet fern, if you're familiar with that plant, that's another grassland species, and a few others.
And the chestnuts.
And the chestnuts, of course. Also the birches, the hickories, they're all in Phagales. So special. That's an order that supports a lot of life. Then we have the Fabales order, which would include all of the bean plants. So the indigo that the false indigo that I talked about, but also the partridge pea, the beans that we eat, all of those support incredible amounts of life. Ericales, which would include our blueberries, but also persimmons and mountain laurels, rhododendrons, partridge berries, all of those plants. And then what was the 4th one? Phagales, Fabales, Ericales. There was another. I don't remember. Those are the orders of plants that will support tremendous amounts of life. And if you trace those lineages back, you'll sort of uncover that these are really old lineages of plants. So they've had a long time to co-evolve with all these species that we see present here. And as we see them disappear from our landscape, like what happened with the chestnut, what we would hope would happen is that some of the associates will jump over to other species in that same order, but we also just might lose them, and that would be a tragedy. I hope that sort of answered the question. Any other questions from the room? No?
Anything on Zoom, Barb?
You can just open it. I don't see anything there. Anyone on Zoom have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Maybe yes.
Well, actually, two questions. Oh, one is, what, you showed some plants that were invasives, and, I know like one, maybe the next list was multiflora rose, and there was another one, I couldn't hear what you said about that. The last plant you showed in that group that were invasives.
I'm sorry, 1 second, Judy.
Oh, they're having technical
Sure.
difficulties.
I think I pushed the window too far out.
Oh,
And I don't know where it is. So maybe Bob can get the questions.
okay, no worries. Judy, can you repeat your question for me, please?
Yeah, you showed a number of pictures of invasive plants. Like, and I know one of them was multiflora rose. I think that was near the list. And there was a last picture that you showed, and I didn't hear you. I couldn't hear what you said. The name of that plant was. That's what I was interested in.
Okay, let me go back. Oh, okay. This plant is called jet bead. It looks very much like a dogwood. It has 4 petal flowers, and opposite branching, but it is a plant that has like a thicket forming habit to it. It does some brambling, and then it produces 4 deep purple berries. You'll see those. We might be closer to flower now than we are to the berries that persist through the winter. But this is a plant that is readily spread around by, of course, birds, and can be like very problematic, taking over large swaths of land. This is one that we have at the Schuylkill Center in a few different places where it's causing problems.
Mm,
Does that answer your question,
okay,
Judy?
thank you. Yes, it does. Do you have I wanted to speak with you separately about something about the Schuylkill Center. Do you have a contact information so I could contact you?
Sure. You can email me at my Schuylkill Center email, which is samantha@schuylkillcenter.org.
Okay. Okay, and also I couldn't hear all the conversation about in the room about knotweed, and what was kind of the conclusions or people's thoughts about that? Trying to get rid of it?
We discussed that, so what I do for removing knotweed is really just hacking at it for long periods of time over the course of many years. So for instance, in our stewardship plot at Whitby Meadow, we have been just hacking at it for 5 years, and we are there every 2 weeks. Maybe not literally every 2 weeks hacking at it, but we are there every 2 weeks to sort of keep it at bay if it's encroaching on our live staking areas. We also discussed that it might be a good candidate for covering with a tarp to sort of suffocate the knotweed in a given area. But we also talked about how herbicide can be detrimental to waterways, and that wouldn't be a good candidate for herbicide necessarily.
There's just
Okay, thank you.
not necessarily in practice like in person, but I've heard of people putting finer mesh over the knotweed, kind of not allowing it, basically it girdles itself when it goes through, in a way, and kind of allows for other smaller plants to kind of go through around it. And if it does make it through, it makes it really easy to hack away.
Cool. So George said that one thing that he has heard of working for knotweed is to put a fine mesh over top, and then the knotweed will start to grow through the mesh, but will suffocate itself.
Was there a port order that you forgot Rosales by any chance?
I don't think so. Although that's another like really big one. I think I was going maybe pines. I don't know what I was thinking with that, but the 3 that I mentioned, those are really huge. Were there any other questions from the chat?
Think of this.
Any other questions out there on Zoom?
Thank you.
I guess not.
Thank you, guys.